Mm-mm-mm.
Yeah, I do.
What up, man? Sorry, I didn't see. Nobody mentioned you were in the. I hope you haven't been waiting too long.
No, I just came in. Just wanted to say hello for a real quick minute.
Cool, man. I mean, as you know, I'm now in France, so this is way easier than it would be if I was back on the. Yeah. Let me tell you something. The more languages you learn, there's just one little part of your brain where you store all those. So I had a guy walk up to me on the street yesterday. He was ethnically, he looked Laotian, and he was wearing a T-shirt that identified him as Laos. He was an old guy with his granddaughter, and I walked up to him and spoke a few words in Laotian, and then he started speaking to me in both Laotian and French, and I'm answering in Chinese. So it's tough. I mean, obviously,
Well, I think I sent you an email about Duolingo,
right?
and I study both both German and French, concurrently.
Yeah.
And so I'll do like, I don't know, whatever they measure your progress and experience points.
Yeah.
It's like it converts to some amount of hours if you were to like convert it to a university kind of thing.
Right.
But I'll do like 30 minutes of one and then switch over to the other, and then like there's like a gear in my head that like literally kind of clicks. So like the words are just a different sort of canvas, and it's just interesting.
Hey,
my brain doing that.
Hey man, maybe it's a talent some people have and some people don't. But when I first started studying Chinese, I'd just been in Thailand for about 2 weeks, whatever it was. That was when I was in Thailand and Durian Ryder started the whole controversy with me. So I'd been speaking Thai every day for just whatever it was, 7 days, 10 days, I don't even know. And then when I arrived in China, I was lapsing into both Thai and Japanese while trying to learn Chinese. And just once in a long while, I accidentally say something in Cambodian. I'm a victim of language education. Is basically.
There's so many layers to it now for you. It's like a dozen languages you have to learn, right?
Yeah, and I mean it's funny too because in the past, like when I learned Laotian, and thus I had fewer languages relatively speaking, I had a feeling of how good I was in Laotian once I got up to higher levels, and now I don't have any feeling with Chinese at all. So like my mom was in a restaurant when we went and met my mom in Beijing. So I introduced my girlfriend to my mom basically, and I on my mother's behalf I said some things to the waitress that seemed completely fluent. Then after I was like, oh okay, I can do that now. So that's weird too. The feeling of what your level is, I think I've lost that because of how many languages I've studied. So. I mean, obviously, you have objective ways to check your level, especially when you're living in China every day. But yeah. You've only done European languages though, right? So English, French, German. Yeah.
I did in university I did 2 years of Arabic.
Oh right, you mentioned that in the email. Right.
Yeah, I actually did 1 semester of Mandarin my very first semester. I did a bunch of languages like my first 2 years. The Arabic was unfortunately very poorly taught. I hope they've improved. That was like 13, 14, 15 years ago by now. It was just abstract grammar. I had a plan at the time to go and study in Yemen, but that kind of didn't. That fell apart.
Exciting times in Yemen, let me tell you.
Back then it was a little bit more stable, but obviously now there's a civil war.
Yeah.
But
even before the Civil War, it was pretty dicey. Yeah. But no, I've been interested in Yemen just because I'm a political science major. It's the kind of place I'm in, just because I like disasters, to be honest. Disasters where maybe we can make a positive difference. Yeah.
The 3 places that were considered to have the purest Arabic were Syria, Yemen, and Iraq.
Yeah.
And so I had considered, and I think there were articles written, I guess, back in the mid 2000s about how there's so many foreign students going to Syria. And so maybe I think by then I lost some interest in that anyway. I probably graduated from college at the time, but I would have considered Syria. But now, like it's been destroyed pretty much. Yeah. So,
well, war is still ongoing. Yeah. Anyway, I mean, obviously, very very emotionally charged subject. Back when September 11th, 2001 happened, I had already when September 11th, 2001 happened, I was still really choosing between Asia and First Nations languages, by which I mean Cree, Ojibwe, Mohawk, Inuit, etc. Languages native to Canada. But I really had closed the door on Arabic and politics of the Muslim world. But not that long before, maybe a year earlier or less, because I had taken courses and I did study politics of the Muslim world, which is fascinating. And even then, before September 11th, it was very obvious that the fate of the world hinged on some of these conflicts and questions. Some of them philosophical, some of them pragmatic, and what have you. I mean, at that time, like I did obviously this is really, really shallow level, but I was looking at, the use of torture in Saudi Arabia and, interesting questions. But yeah, when September 11th, 2001 happened, I had to sit there and go, wow, if I had chosen to go into Arabic, or if I chose now, my whole life would be different, right? I'd be going down that, that path, and those would be the issues, and And instead, of course, when I went to a place like Cambodia was just knitting itself together, after the end of the war. And Laos was a few steps ahead. But that was truly post-war rather than pre-war or during the war. So, yeah, very different vibe. Very different opportunities and dangers, yeah.
Because I grew up, in Europe. So 9/11 happened, 1 week into my university life. Yeah. And so that kind of shaped how I wound up assembling a Middle Eastern Studies major when I was an undergrad. So I actually, prior to that, mid-high school through the end of high school, I was really into Buddhism. Oh, yeah. And so when I was applying to universities, I was like, oh, let me mention about, considering becoming a scholar of things like youth study, like Pali and Sanskrit. And I was really into Zen Buddhism and Taoism, but the Mahayana strands, but generally. But that didn't happen. I wound up having a different kind of pursuits.
I mean, as you can imagine, I don't know how deep you got into it. I've known a couple of black guys, mostly African American. I think one was black from Africa who did go into Buddhism heavily. And the racism issue is part of your life every day, So, and it's funny too because I've spoken to some white and Asian scholars of Buddhism, and at first when I mention racism in the Buddhism, they're just shocked. They think it doesn't exist, and then you throw out just 2 or 3 examples, like, oh yeah, right. But yeah, it would have been a huge issue in your life. On the other hand, there always has been the potential. I mean, you see how much ground Islam gained within the United States. Black Americans, African Americans, what am I going to say? Even with, very dubious leadership. You see how groups like the 5%er movement, Rastafarianism, there were a lot of new religious movements that gained ground, and I've always felt like, look, I mean, I'm now an ex-Buddhist, but I'm also an ex-scholar of Buddhism. Buddhism really had a lot of positive stuff to offer African Americans in contrast to those other movements, like in contrast to Rastafarianism. You can just say some shallow stuff. Buddhism has Kung Fu. Kung Fu is appealing a lot.
Which I studied for a couple of years.
But I just say, I think definitely African Americans would be interested in going to a Buddhist community center that teaches Kung Fu and then also has this philosophy that there is no soul and all is suffering. I can see that catching on. It's, as I say, Rastafarianism is its competition, so some people are going to opt for each. So do you look back on Buddhism as the road you didn't travel?
No, I think I look at it as a chapter, as well as an echo into a lot of the ways I see things. I'm not a Buddhist. I'm just an atheist, basically. Yeah. Main thing I probably got out of it, especially coming into it in my teenage years, is just some of the meditation techniques to have a calm mind, have a create mindfulness, basically.
Anyway, just wondering. I mean, for me, how politically I approach veganism, but in the same way, like within Buddhism, I felt like if this isn't linked to humanitarian work or trying to make the world a better place, isn't some positive goal we're working towards, all we're doing is raising money so that this class of Buddhist monks, almost none of whom have any legitimacy, 99% of whom can live in, kind of privilege and idleness. So that was a lot of what I saw happening in Buddhism. And really devout Buddhists, if you talk to them privately, they'll agree with you. And you get different kind of reactions to that. But yeah, obviously I'm not saying that all religion or everything in life has to be linked to humanitarian work. But it's like, well, if it's not legit in terms of humanitarian work, and it's not legit in terms of scholarship or something else, scholarship, research, real Buddhist philosophy in that strict sense, then what are we doing here, guys? Because anybody can eat rice noodles. Anybody can put on a robe and eat rice noodles, and this religion starts to look more and more like Catholicism. You know what I mean? So, yeah. Anyway, cool. Have you ever actually been to China?
I haven't been to Asia. I've only been to Africa, Europe, the Americas.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's an open door to you. I mean, certainly, in contrast to both, Europe and Africa. I mean, so I'll give an example. My girlfriend's here sitting next to me, which is off camera. There are things I find inspiring about Chinese culture. Just the way people work together. White people, I've talked about this with Asians. White people, and we can take Scotland as an example. Scottish people tend to be very tenacious, tend to hate their own parents. If they work hard to please their parents, it tends to be with a sense of resentment and competition. Like a Scottish family, or most white families I knew in Canada, you had different brothers within the family, hated each other and competed with each other. And that's really absent in Chinese society. And instead, just the way people work together. Of course, they can work together to do terrible things. They can work together to commit mass murder or, atrocities or crimes against humanity. But, seeing the way people cooperate in Chinese culture is a kind of long-term, low-level inspiration to me. And, it's a contrast to what goes on even within veganism as a movement and so on.
I got that sense when I was traveling in both Cuba and Ghana, in West Africa. Right. In terms of, it's kind of... Now, in Cuba, there is the ideology of socialism that pervades everything. Right. But beyond that, it's like a kind of a communitarian spirit that goes on. It's like the whole country's a family. Yeah. And because I'm black, everyone thought I was Cuban. Oh, yeah, whereas they assume the European or the white people I was with were tourists. They would speak to me in Spanish first and oh, this is your group. But in any case, it's like there's a kind of a unspoken and very easy sense in which people can just kind of cooperate on something simple. When I was in Ghana, there was an armed robbery I experienced, and in the place I was staying at, when my mother and my sister had come to visit me when I was studying there, in the middle of my time there, and I guess they'd follow people from the airport to wherever the armed robbers at the time. And Accra, where I was staying, was a very safe city. It's safer than New York. It's just that there would be people probably with unloaded pistols and shotguns, and they would chase people for their cell phones at the time. That was a big deal. But when that happened, immediately thereafter, the whole community, almost kind of erupted into a march, and they all during that evening, and they all were looking for people, looking for who did it, and everyone was coming out, and everyone was offering support from just all over, people I hadn't known, even just all over that neighborhood. Yeah. So there's a easy sense of solidarity that you find there that's absent in a place like New York.
Something my father said. My father is now deceased, which is interesting. He didn't say that many wise things, but he said that he felt that Japanese culture was always really well suited to socialism and communism, whereas Chinese culture was inherently very badly suited to it. It's an interesting comment. My father knew Chinese culture better than Japanese culture, but it is definitely an interesting time in China that way because they have those ideals of communism. And you still meet people who believe in them. And a lot of them are tempted by Christianity. They're tempted to convert to Christianity for the same reasons. They find the same ideals within the Christian, grab bag that they find within socialism or communism. And, in a lot of ways, Chinese culture is all about wealth, status, money, my money, cut anyone's throat to make money, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm sorry. I'm really not stereotyping. I live my life in the minority of people who reject those values. By and large, people who become university professors and scholars and historians and care about this stuff. They're not the people who live that way. But nevertheless, I've lived in Hong Kong as well as Taiwan and Yunnan, these various parts of China. But that is really strong, kind of like more capitalist than capitalism. You know what I mean? And money over everything. So yeah, but at the same time, there's this kind of ghost of communism haunting everything. And, I defy you. Anyone can do this. You can even search within YouTube to find these videos. But look for videos where the current leadership of the Communist Party actually defines communism. What is communism supposed to mean? The answers are very strange, So it's a question for the future. Everyone who watches my channel knows I'm not pro-communist. But nevertheless, I can sympathize with the people who want to believe. For me, a large part of my, adolescence, my teenage years, was overcoming the impulse to want to believe.
Cool.
Yeah, change the topic if you want to.
Speaking of like political veganism, I've gotten more involved, I guess, in the past half year in some of the movements in New York. There was a law that the city council just passed. It's called Intro 1233, to just basically ban animals in circuses in the 5 boroughs.
Interesting.
That was so I got involved in phone banking for that before it passed. So there is some motion, and that was by the Humane Society of the U.S., the New York chapter. Yeah. That was some of the main people that were doing that. The next big thing is probably to get carriage horses out of Central Park, which the current mayor had been trying. He had campaigned on doing that before he was inaugurated in 2014, but they couldn't figure out the carriage industry sort of fought back, and they have in Central Park there are horse carriages mostly in the lower part of the park, closer to Midtown, and then there are also the pedal, what do you call them? Pedal trolleys or
right.
Rickshaws, basically rickshaws.
Yeah. Human-drawn carriages, right? Yeah.
And so back then there was some kind of odd sort of deal that they wanted to make that the rickshaw riders didn't accept, about they could have the northern half of the park, or they could have like the northern quarter of the park, and then the horse carriages had the southern. But it didn't make any sense, and that fell apart. So that's probably the next big thing that's going to be happening. With that, a lot of people are going to campaign around. Yeah.
Just say about New York. I think the main struggle will be visibility. Really, really, really short anecdote, because I do want to hear what your experience has been lately in New York activism. I once put a question on the internet, and I got a ton of responses. It was when I was still with my ex-wife, and we were looking at where we should move. We were considering moving to various cities in the U.S. I said, well, what really is the best city to be vegan in? And at first, there were a whole bunch of responses. But the one that really won, as people kind of thought about it, and the conversation went on in response to this question, was New York City. And they said, look, places like Portland, Oregon, the veganism may be more visible because the total population is small, but really New York City is where the action is, whether it's in terms of activism or, the potential. But I don't think anyone has ever tried to even come with an estimate how many vegans are in New York City. It could be 5,000. It could be 10,000. But when you think about it, I mean, I'm not going to, on the basis of zero information, I'm not going to guess that it's way more than that. But any city, if you've got 10,000 people within a subway ride of each other, there's got to be some real potential there, right? All right, that's all I had to say. Sorry. So continue.
Well, I mean, New York City has 8.5 million people. The largest meetup groups for vegetarians and vegans in North America are in New York City. In the past, I've been vegan for 18 years now. In the past 1 year, I'd say that the amount of vegan type of events has multiplied like 5-fold. It's like, I think there's been sort of a plateau for a while, and then sort of all of a sudden it's kind of exploded in terms of sort of the interest in it. There's a vegan block party in the Upper West Side, like about a month and a half ago. There's Veg Fest here. There's the Green Fest, which is largely a Veg Fest, basically. There's going to be the first ever vegetarian food and drink festival in Randall's Island, which is like all the there's Randall's Island is like this island in the East River where all the big festivals will occur, like the big music festivals, Governor's Ball, things like what do you call it, SummerSlam, things like that. So that's a big deal to have an event like that. Vegan speed dating, they brought that to New York just inside of this year in 2017. There's a lot of interesting developments. Kind of suggesting a rise in interest, at least, here in 5 months.
It's interesting too. I mean, I also get email from long-term vegans. You've been in it for 18 years. I just got some messages today from Erin Janis. Erin Janis has a few videos with over 1 million views, so she's as big as vegan propaganda on YouTube gets. I'm not using propaganda in a negative sense, but I do think her videos are pro-vegan propaganda. That's what they are. Or you can call them infotainment or whatever. But, it's interesting because, I mean, some people get lazy, some people get complacent, but most of the people I hear from there's that insatiable desire to do more. It's not enough, and whether it's the sense of the change they were looking for in the world is not happening, or the friends they wanted to have, where they thought the movement would take them in terms of their social circle or whatever it is. It's interesting. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is inertia. It becomes an inspiration for people, I think, who are vegan long term, and then they're looking around for new hammers and new nails, new tools and new methods. Have you been involved with any organizations with capital O? Have you been involved with Direct Action Everywhere? We were just talking about recently, or any other vegan, or PETA for that matter, any other vegan organization that has an acronym?
The most I've done for an organization. Well, the answer is no, basically. But I've worked with the Humane Society. I've worked with I volunteered for both weekends of the New York City Vegetarian Food Festival. So I worked with those organizers and everything that they were doing. That was just this past May.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm looking for more things that align with sort of what I think is practical.
Do you think about starting your own group or your own movement? I mean, it's a time commitment, right?
Something like a Harlem Uptown Vegans, Harlem something.
Yeah.
I have to draft that. I have thought about that. Doing something in this part of Manhattan. That might be in the works.
Yeah. I mean, it's huge. I had people writing to me that they were so disappointed in me after I made a video that I think is a really positive video. It's my manifesto video. So I have a playlist for it. I have a video. What is it called? My Vegan Manifesto. Do you remember the title of the video? Okay, I even forget the title of the video now. But that video I had translated into 9 languages. But it's interesting. One of the responses I got to that video from many people was, it was in a sense both positive and negative. People wrote into me and they were disappointed because they thought after I made that video, the next day I was going to incorporate a foundation and start a vegan community. In the most literal sense of bricks and mortar, buildings with people living in them. You know what I mean? Because that video, I'm stating my kind of long-term aspirations. And I mean, it's touching in a sense, right? They saw that video and thought within weeks or something, there'd be something rolling. It's I don't even know who is. I mean, maybe it's worth reflecting. I mean, there probably are some famous high-profile vegans who could make that happen, whether Hollywood stars or millionaires or what have you. That's for sure. Yeah, so the title of the video is actually On Community. The playlist says On Community, a Vegan Manifesto. And it's been translated into a bunch of languages. But yeah, that still is my manifesto. That still is saying, what I want to say. We've been here we were talking about daycare. We're talking about retirement homes a lot because we're here meeting family. My daughter's here. My ex-wife is here. My ex-wife is in a situation here in France where the government forces my child to eat meat at school legally. So every single vegan in France has a conflict with the school board. And then but legally, it's required for your children to eat meat at lunch in France. So what are you going to do in that scenario? When you think about, vegan schools, vegan daycare, because daycare is a huge problem, right? If your kids being handed, non-vegan food and they don't know the difference because they're too young or whatever. Or even if they do know the difference, but you expect a 3-year-old or something to stand up on point of principle and refuse to eat ice cream. It's asking a lot from a 3-year-old or a toddler or something, right? And yeah, also, talking about retirement homes and old age, because we're talking to relatives who are in that category and so on. So all that stuff I said in that video, it still haunts me. It's still my objective. What do you think I'm going to do? And when I made that video, I was unemployed. Now I earn $300 a month? Forgetting US dollars, what it is. You know what I mean? Living in China. So I have a beautiful, wonderful life in so many ways. But it's touching. People really thought that just because I expressed the initiative and the vision that I could make this happen. And they were disappointed that I hadn't already made it happen. But, I mean, in your case, you're 18 years in. I don't know your age, but you look pretty young and well-preserved. You've probably got another 30 years minimum looking at you know what I mean? That's what we all got to think about.
I'm 33.
Okay. I was talking to a vegan activist who supports me on Patreon. And she's a couple years younger than you. I think she said she was 32. And she was talking about her plans for when she's 55. Life is long.
Plan ahead.
Yeah, well, Right, and that's just the suffocating reality of having responsibilities, whether it's responsibilities to your kids or to your grandparents or to your discipline, your job, whatever it is, man. And look, great having you on. It's past 11 p.m. now, so I gotta hit the sack. Hearing your voice for the first time, I know you've been a long time supporter and viewer and what have you. And I say this to a lot of people, but I do mean it. I hope I still know you 5 years from now. Future of the movement is long. I don't know what you're going to be doing. I mean, obviously everyone ends up in New York sooner or later. At some point I'm going to set foot in New York City, but one way or another, I hope we still know each other, even if there's no possibility of really cooperating because I may be in Canada or China or what have you. Talent is scarce. Never forget that. And within veganism, it's fractious and fragmentary, and so many people are eccentrics or verging onto insane. Anyone I meet who's basically talented, educated, self-disciplined, I view you as a precious resource. Okay, great talking to you. Have a good night.
Take care.